My name is Ruth Davenport. I'm 71, born and raised in a little lakeside town outside Minneapolis where winter is as much a member of the family as anyone. People who don't know Minnesota think snow is pretty. We know snow is a long, relentless conversation. It asks for boots, for shovels, for patience. We answer it the same way we answer loss. Keep moving, keep shifting the burden, keep the porch light on. I was a widow for 12 years when this story began. My husband, Harold, used to joke that I had a heart that could outlast a furnace and hands tough enough to steady a canoe. After he died, the house got quieter and I filled that noise with the small industrious things he used to do. Stacking firewood, mending mittens, sweeping the porch in a way that would make the porch feel cherished. The neighborhood kids still called me Mrs. Ruth, the way they had when their coats were too big and their mittens were homemade. My son, Mark, lives a little over an hour away now with his wife, Jenna, and 2 kids, Ellie, 12, and Sam, 8. You've met families like mine. Their lives go fast, with soccer schedules, PTA emails, last-minute business trips. They love you in bursts, big, well-intentioned bursts, and then they tumble off the calendar because life insists on being immediate. The year this starts, Mark had been working later than usual. Jenna had been doing the school carpool shuffle and some work-from-home thing that made her eyes tired. They called me all the time in the normal way people who love you and don't live with you call. How's the furnace? Need any groceries? We'll come by Sunday. The calls were a kind of rope that kept me steady. The winter had begun early that year. December came with a low sun and a sky that seemed to hold its breath. I kept the wood stacked, the salt bucket full, and my little old Chevy ready. You do that when you get older. You get ready for small emergencies the way a cat gets ready for rain. It's practical. It's habit. It's survival. On the morning I bent to shovel the walk, because I always shovel my walk, even when they offer. I didn't think the world would tilt. I thought of cookies I'd bake for Ellie's school event. I thought of the casserole I'd bring over for Sunday dinner. I thought of the way Mark laughs when he's proud of his kids. I worked the shovel the way I always had, careful, methodical, the rhythm of it familiar as prayer. When I stopped to catch my breath near the curb, Jenna's car pulled in. She waved to me, flashlight in hand, breath fogging. "Hi, Mom," she called. "We just wanted to grab the kids' snow pants. We'll be right back." It's funny how certain small moments sit like treasures in your mind. She unlocked the hatch, fussed with a backpack. Ellie hopped out, hugged me, said, "Grandma, your cookies better be good," and Sam waved like a propeller. Mark ran around the side of the car, kissed my cheek, and said, "We'll be right back, Mom. We'll be right back." He put his hand on my shoulder like he used to when I was younger, and for an instant, for a heartbeat, everything felt ordinary and safe. Then they all climbed back into the car, Mark, Jenna, 2 kids, and they left. I watched their taillights fade and thought nothing of it. People come and go. I salted the steps and swept the porch and hummed a hymn half remembered. I baked the cookies anyway, as if that single act of sugar and butter might stitch us all firmly back together. I didn't expect their calls to stop. That afternoon the sky tightened as if someone had pulled a curtain. The wind moved in a way that meant snow footsteps would be heavy and insistent. I kept busy. The knitting, the dishes, the little tasks that are therapy when worry comes. I called Mark to confirm plans for Sunday. The line went straight to voicemail. I called Jenna. Nothing. I sent a text. Just making the casserole early. Want me to bring anything else? And then I let it sit, thinking they were just busy. By evening, the white came down in a way that smothered sounds. You could stand outside and the world would be swallowed until you felt like you were only air and salt and memory. The television drone turned into a lullaby of static and weather alerts. The county sent messages that seemed calm and polite and final. Severe blizzard warning. Travel not recommended. People who don't live through these warnings imagine they're being dramatic. They're not. It's like hearing someone say there will be a storm and then watching the sky confirm it like an old friend showing up. I made myself a simple supper, put a cookie on a plate for each of the grandkids, and set extra tea aside. My hands were steady, but there was a small, uncomfortable hollowness. No one had come by. No one had called to cancel. In the flickering light, the house seemed like a ship with no one at the helm. At midnight, the phone on my nightstand buzzed. I reached for it, thinking it would be Mark checking in to make sure the road was okay. It wasn't Mark. It was an email from the airline. Flight confirmed. Departing for Phoenix. Family reservation. Davenport party. My stomach lurching is a polite way to put it. I read it twice, then a third time. I scrolled back through my texts, through the call logs. Nothing amiss. Everything normal. I called Mark. No answer. I called Jenna. It rang. Went to voicemail. I left a voicemail that trembled. Please tell me you're all right. Where are you? Morning came like the end of the world and the start of it. Soft light through frozen trees and a driveway already buried. I looked out the window and saw tire tracks, but they weren't ours. The mailbox still held the neighborhood newsletter, a little flapped by the wind. I set the kettle on and bundled up. My heart had a heavy, sinking feeling like a stone in a washing machine. At 10, I walked to the end of the drive and squinted at the sky. A neighbor, old Mr. Henley, shivered on his front porch. He waved me over like we had a secret. You see the papers? He asked, and handed me a printout from a local forum. Someone had posted a photo of Mark's family at the airport. Smiling faces, luggage, sun in their eyes. The caption, heading south. Family emergency. We'll be back soon. I felt the ground go thin. The word emergency made my fingers tingle with cold. A dozen rational thoughts swarmed. Maybe a sudden health scare? Maybe a business emergency? Maybe a crisis so private they couldn't say. I called Mark again. No answer. I called Jenna again. The phone went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Are you safe? Why did you leave? Please let me know you're okay." Minutes passed with no reply. The wind had learned how to whistle through the eaves like a mockingbird. When the television cut to a snow advisory showing interstate closures and airports with weather delays, the rational part of me warmed and suggested practical steps. Call the airline, call the hospital, call the police if you must. The older part of me, the part that had buried loved ones, the part that went to church on Tuesdays to cope with loneliness, felt something else, a prickle of hurt so sharp it hurt to breathe. Hurt has no neat logic. It is simply a thing that presses your face and asks you to notice. I dressed and started the slow drive to Mark's house. The town looked like a photograph someone had washed until the color went out of it. My Chevy crunched over rutted roads, salt spraying like confetti. I told myself not to be dramatic. I told myself to breathe. By the time I turned onto Mark Street, tracks marred the snow like an accusation. The house was dark. The porch light off. The patio chairs under a cap of white. No footprints leading up to the door. A small, empty feeling perched on my chest. I stood by the window and watched. Watched for movement, for a curtain to twitch, for some tiny act to tell me they'd just returned. An hour passed. 2. The house stayed still as a held breath. Inside my head, a different kind of weather was forming. Questions, sharp and precise. Why would they leave for Phoenix during a blizzard? Why would they not tell me? Why would they not check on the furnace? Why leave an old woman who had shoveled their driveway under a cover of snow? If you're still listening and feeling that slow, cold tightening in your chest, press that like button and subscribe. Because right now, as I stood shivering by the window, I didn't yet know how far this would go. I only knew this. Something had changed. A chasm had opened between the life I had treated as ordinary and the life I was suddenly standing on the edge of. That night I slept poorly, if at all. I left the porch light on and put the spare blankets on the couch. I imagined Mark and the kids laughing in a sunlit terminal, the kind of image that felt wrong and too bright. I imagined phone calls of apology the moment they landed. I imagined hugs that would restitch this seam. At 3 in the morning I woke to a sensation that wakes you like cold water. The house felt too quiet. The previous day's weather had turned the world into glass. Every tiny sound was amplified. I padded down the hallway and saw, in the dimness, that the kitchen door, the back door, was slightly ajar. At first I thought the wind had blown it. Then I saw the footprints in the porch snow leading away from the house, toward the street, heading in the opposite direction of the car tracks. They were small and hurried, the kind children make when they dash for a bus. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob and something else, the feeling of being overlooked. Not forgotten like a lost mitten, not ignored like a stray advertisement, but deliberately left behind for reasons that I couldn't name. The ache that settled in my chest now had the edge of betrayal. You ever notice how silence can be louder than any storm? That morning, the wind had died down, but the quiet it left behind wasn't peace. It was something heavier. I could hear the pipes ticking in the walls, the old furnace grumbling under the weight of snow. Outside, the driveway looked like a field of ghosts. No tire tracks, no footprints, no life. I sat by the window with my tea, watching flakes drift down, and told myself they'd call. Maybe the flight was delayed. Maybe they'd tried to reach me and the lines were down. You know, the excuses we make when the truth hasn't yet gathered the courage to walk into the room. But deep down, something sharp was forming. A feeling. That sixth sense women get after raising families, forgiving too much, and pretending not to notice patterns. At around noon, I heard a knock. A firm, deliberate knock. Not Mark's. When I opened the door, a deliverman stood there in a bright orange parka, holding a box the size of a small suitcase. "Delivery for Davenport," he said. I took the box, signed, and asked, "From where?" He shrugged. "Arizona. Overnight shipping." Arizona. My heart stuttered. I carried the box to the kitchen table, brushed the snow from the lid, and opened it. Inside were a few items wrapped in bubble wrap, a framed family photo, a set of Christmas ornaments, and a short handwritten note. "Mom, we didn't want you to worry. We took the kids south for the winter since the blizzard looked bad. The trip came up fast, just a few weeks to reset and relax. The house is fine, and we'll check in soon. Love, Mark." No phone call. No explanation. Just that, and a box of things that looked suspiciously like the ones I'd left on their mantel last weekend. That's when the tears came. Not the kind that sting, but the kind that burn quietly, behind your eyes, the kind that make your breath short. I looked around at the empty house, the walls humming faintly from the heater, and thought, they didn't even think I'd notice. If you're still watching, don't click away now. I promise. This story isn't about self-pity. It's about what happens when you realize the people you loved most took your kindness and left it freezing on the porch. So if you're listening, hit that like button, because what comes next will chill you more than any Minnesota winter. That night, I sat down with my old laptop, the one Harold used to balance our bills on, and started searching. Flight trackers. Hotel check-ins. You'd be surprised how much the internet will tell you if you just know where to look. I found it, a family suite booked in Scottsdale, under Mark's name, with an early check-in, same day as the blizzard warning. So it wasn't last minute. It had been planned. My son, the boy I raised to hold doors open, to send thank you notes, to shovel for the neighbors, had looked at his mother, a widow, and thought, she'll be fine. She always is. The next day, I got another surprise. The pastor from our church called. "Ruth," he said softly, "Mark mentioned you'd be away for a few weeks. I just wanted to confirm before we send over your volunteer schedule." My grip tightened on the phone. "Away?" "Yes," he said, "you decided to join them down south. Said you needed rest." That's when the room began to spin. Mark had told everyone I'd gone with them. That I was safe, on vacation. That the house would be empty. And that's when I realized what he'd done wasn't just inconsiderate, it was intentional. He didn't just forget me. He erased me. That night, the temperature dropped to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. The furnace moaned, the windows glistened with frost, and the pipes creaked like an old spine under pressure. I sat in Harold's chair, the one by the fire, wrapped in the same quilt I'd sewn the year he died. I stared at the photo from the box. Mark, Jenna, the kids, their smiles glowing under Arizona sun. "Must be nice," I whispered, "to leave winter behind." Then I noticed something strange, a line at the bottom of the note I hadn't caught before. Tiny, faint pencil writing. "P.S. We turned off the auto payments on your gas and utilities. You'll need to handle those directly. Love you." They'd cut off my accounts. Left me, in a Minnesota winter, with no guarantee of heat. That was the moment the sadness changed shape. It wasn't grief anymore. It was resolve. For 3 days, the blizzard howled. No one came. The phone stayed silent. Neighbors later said they thought I'd gone south like the Davenports had said. Even my church friends assumed I was on vacation. That was how thorough my son's lie was. It erased me from my own town. But I wasn't done yet. When the storm cleared, I called the utility office. They confirmed it. Mark had called, on behalf of his elderly mother, and cancelled the auto payments. Apparently, he'd even updated the mailing address to his home in Phoenix. I thanked the clerk, hung up, and stared at the snowbanks glittering outside my window. You see, grief makes you numb. Betrayal makes you clever. And I had all the time in the world to think. That night, I took Harold's old journal, his logbook from his carpentry business, and wrote something across the first blank page. They think I'm helpless. That's their first mistake. Then I started a list. Names, numbers, dates, things only a mother would know. Mark's business partners, Jenna's online boutique passwords. She'd once had me help set up her Etsy. Their mortgage company. They'd used my address for correspondence when they moved. And, tucked between all that, one line that made me smile for the first time in days. Revenge doesn't have to shout. It can whisper, and freeze them where they stand. If you're still here, take a second to subscribe, because in the next part, I'll show you how one quiet widow in Minnesota turned a blizzard into her weapon. They left me frozen in the cold, but they forgot I built my life here. And I know exactly how to make an ungrateful family feel winter in their bones. That blank page in Harold's old ledger felt like a map. I'd expected grief to be heavy and dull, but grief had an edge now, a sharpened clarity that cut through the fog. The betrayal didn't make me want to lash out in the ways people imagine. Dramatic confrontations, slamming doors, shouting matches. What it made me want was to reclaim what they had quietly removed. My dignity, my warmth, my place in the family. For 3 nights I sat up late, not because I slept less, but because my mind worked in a way that felt new to me, strategic, almost young again. I had time on my hands. Time in my life had always been an ally. There wasn't anywhere to be for me but where I was, and where I was had suddenly been made into a battleground. First, the facts. I wrote them down in black ink like a ledger. Dates, calls, who I'd spoken to, names, the airline confirmations, the courier that delivered the box with that thin apology note, the utility clerk's confirmation that Mark had redirected bills, the pastor's surprise call. Each fact was a small nail in the coffin of the story they were telling everyone, that I'd chosen to leave, that I'd be taking a rest in the sun. Second, the witnesses. Everyone's first instinct is to think family matters are private. That's what Mark counted on. He had told the neighborhood, the church, even the utility office a different story. A story that erased me. But people are gullible only until someone gives them a different truth with proof. I started listing names. Mr. Henley, who had handed me the forum printout. Mrs. Alvarez from the church, who always baked extra rolls for the bake sale. Lucy at the post office, who knew every forwarding address in town. Small town people keep memory like treasure. If I showed up to them with the ledger, with receipts, with evidence, they would believe me because they already believed me as Mrs. Ruth. That decision felt right in my bones. I am a woman who knows her neighbors. I'd signed more cards than I could count at the senior center. People owed me their kindness, and now I would call it in not out of malice, but out of necessity. Third, the practical necessities. The house would not keep warm if the bills were unpaid. So I called the utility office back, this time with a different hat on. not a woman flustered and hurt, but a citizen asserting her rights. I asked to speak with the account manager. I explained that no one had authority to cancel my auto payments without my consent, and that someone had used my personal information improperly. The clerk listened. There was a long pause. Then she asked for more information. Here's what you learn when life has taught you how to keep records. You can be patient with people who have power. I gave them my copy of the ledger, the courier receipt with the Arizona postmark, and a photocopy of the note that had told me they'd turn off auto payments. 2 days later, the utility company reactivated my account under my name and promised to reverse the unauthorized address change. It wasn't dramatic, but it was clean, the kind of quiet justice that feels better than fireworks. You'd be surprised how reassuring it is when a company calls you by your full name and says, "We'll put a fraud alert on this account." That little line sits inside you for weeks like a warm stone in a pocket. Fourth, the social consequences. People in our town like weddings. They like family stories. They like to know who did what, who showed up and who stayed away. Mark had miscalculated how tightly the town's social fabric was stitched. He had assumed the world outside his new life wouldn't notice or care. He'd been wrong. I began with small, quiet things. I called Mrs. Alvarez at church and asked her a favor. To mention, gently, during the next luncheon that I'd been at home during the storm and had taken extra care of the furnace. She was happy to oblige. I told the story simply, without accusation, and she told it again to Mrs. Delaney, who ran the church newsletter. Before I knew it, people were stopping by with casseroles and warm socks and a kind that felt like truth. The trick wasn't to shout "liar" in the middle of a party. It was to make sure the truth settled into the conversation like a steadying hand. At the same time, I wrote a letter, 3 paragraphs, no more, and addressed it to the pastor, the neighborhood board, and the church's care committee. I attached copies of the receipts, the courier slip, and the airline's booking screenshot. I didn't ask for judgment. I asked for help. I asked them to check in with folks who might otherwise assume I'd chosen a vacation. The result was immediate. Calls, visits, and people bearing casseroles and sympathy. The narrative my son tried to build started to fragment. YouTube viewers, if this is grabbing you, hit subscribe now, because the next moves are subtler and, frankly, delicious in their rightness. I promised myself I would not descend into pettiness. I'd learned a lifetime ago that someone's cruelty doesn't need to be answered with the same coin. Instead, I wanted consequences that would make Mark think twice before deciding what he could say about me again. Fifth, leverage. People in families have soft spots, and every family business has windows where reality and image meet. Mark ran a small contracting business and was proud of the image he kept, the neatness of his crews, the respect he commanded at city meetings. Reputation matters. It matters more than golf scores and stock picks. It's more brittle, and it breaks faster than you'd think. I reached out quietly to people who had hired him, not with threats, but with simple questions. Did you know Mark rerouted my mail? Have you heard that he left me here in a blizzard? People responded with surprise, and soon, with concern. A couple of his regular clients called me to ask if everything was all right. When they learned the truth, more than one said they'd be checking in themselves. I'm not proud of using this leverage, but I am proud of using the truth. I never lied. I never forged a paper. I simply let the facts speak in rooms they hadn't been allowed to speak in before. That's often how justice happens in small towns, not with lawyers right away, but with neighbors and reputation. Meanwhile, the emotional work continued. I'm a widow. That's a title people carry. It means you live with a kind of quiet that others don't. But it also means you know how to make friends with time. I spent mornings at the community center, knitting, sharing stories, and building what might look like small alliances. People my age love stories. We keep them for each other. I told my version of events without bitterness but with clarity. Those stories spread. I also made sure to give Mark space to reply. There were calls where he tried to smooth things over with phrases like, "I didn't think you'd want to come in this weather." He sounded embarrassed, and there were apologies. But apology alone doesn't reheat a house or reinstate signatures. I told him calmly, in the way you tell a child who's been careless, that I would accept no more assumptions about my whereabouts. If you want to help me, I said, help me the way you'd want someone to help your mother. Not by deciding for me, but by calling me. He floundered. He asked for forgiveness. I told him forgiveness would come when I saw consistent action. Actions build trust. Words alone build wind. Next, and this is where some of you might bristle, I made sure formal steps were in place. I visited a lawyer who offered an initial consultation free at the community legal aid clinic. I asked about guardianship, about powers of attorney, about the legality of changing mailing addresses. The lawyer's face had a polite, practical expression that I liked. Mr. Davenport's actions, she said quietly, may constitute elder neglect if there was intent to deprive you of necessary services. She suggested sending a strongly worded letter to Mark laying out the facts and asking for immediate remedy. Letters have a funny way of sounding louder than you think. When someone's name is on stationery, when someone else outside the family acknowledges what was done, the shelter of plausible deniability evaporates. So I wrote that letter. I made 2 copies, one for Mark and one I kept. I mailed it, and I saved the receipt. But the plan wasn't just paperwork. There was a final human thing I wanted that felt like it would matter more than any court letter. I wanted the town to see what they'd seen through my eyes. I wanted a small public moment where neighbors would recognize the truth. I asked the pastor if I might say a few words at the next community luncheon. He hesitated for a heartbeat and then agreed. Standing in front of a room full of familiar faces, I told the story plainly. I showed them the ledger and the courier receipt. I explained in simple language that being considerate is not optional, and that families should not presume an elderly parent will shuffle quietly out of the way. People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. A few of Mark's clients were there, and the look on their faces was the look of people suddenly realizing they'd been told a tidy tale that wasn't quite right. When I walked out of that luncheon, the snow outside felt less like a blanket and more like a sheet pulled away. Conversation about the Davenports changed from "they're enjoying the sun" to "they left Ruth in a blizzard." Mark's phone started ringing with questions. He called me afterward, voice small, and for the first time, I felt something like embarrassment from him rather than defensiveness. It was a start. If you're still here, hit that like button, because in part 4 I'll show you how the quiet work of consequence becomes visible, how the son who thought he could erase his mother's presence begins to feel the winter he handed her. And trust me, the way things unfold will surprise you. After that church luncheon, the town was no longer whispering. It was talking. And Mark Davenport's version of the story, that neat little tale about Mom heading south to rest, began to unravel faster than snow melting on a roof in March. Neighbors stopped him at the grocery store. The pastor, accidentally, mentioned me during Sunday announcements. And his business phone, the one that usually rang with clients booking remodeling jobs, started ringing for different reasons. When you live in a small Minnesota town, reputation is currency. And Mark had always guarded his carefully. Pressed shirts, clean trucks, a proud smile in every Rotary Club photo. But once people knew the truth, they looked at him differently. A client, Mrs. Peterson, posted on Facebook, heartbroken to hear what Ruth Davenport went through. Kindness begins at home. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even direct. But in a town of 5,000, that single post was enough. Within a week, 2 contracts were cancelled. Within 2 weeks, a supplier refused to extend credit. Mark called me one night, half angry, half desperate. "Mom, why did you have to tell everyone? You're ruining my business." I let his words hang there for a moment, letting silence do the work. Then I said softly, "I didn't ruin it, Mark. I just stopped protecting it." That line hit him harder than any shout ever could. He stammered, muttered something about fixing things, and hung up. 2 days later, the lawyer's letter arrived at his Arizona address. Certified mail. Signature required. The document was short, professional, and devastatingly clear. This correspondence serves to inform you that your actions may constitute elder neglect and unauthorized tampering with financial accounts. Mrs. Davenport requests full restoration of her financial autonomy and a written acknowledgement of your conduct. Failure to comply may result in a formal report to Adult Protective Services. No threats. No yelling. Just consequences. He didn't respond for 3 days. On the 4th, an envelope arrived at my door. Inside, a check for $5,000 and a note that read, "I'm sorry. I panicked. We'll talk when I'm back." I smiled, folded the note, and tucked it into Harold's ledger. "Good," I said quietly. "We're just getting started." You see, Mark had also made one critical mistake. He'd used my address for several business licenses years ago. That meant certain renewal notices, tax forms, and state contractor filings still came to my mailbox. So when the annual renewal notice arrived in late February, I didn't forward it. I simply let it sit. And in March, when the renewal expired and the state website publicly marked his license as inactive due to non-renewal, his business officially lost certification. No lies. No crimes. Just a mother who decided to stop doing her son's paperwork for him. When they finally came back from Arizona in early April, the snow was gone but the frost between us hadn't thawed one bit. I was sitting on the porch when their SUV rolled up the driveway. The same car that had driven away through the blizzard months before. Jenna stepped out first, her tan fading, her smile uncertain. The kids waved, hesitant. And then Mark climbed out, slower than usual, carrying a grocery bag like an offering. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't invite them in. He took a few steps closer. I'm sorry about everything." I watched him for a moment, and then said, "You left me in a storm, Mark. Not just the kind outside." He lowered his head. Jenna tried to step forward, but I raised my hand slightly, not to stop her, but to steady myself. "You told people I was with you. You cut off my heat. You cancelled my payments. You told my friends I'd gone away." I took a deep breath. Do you know what it feels like to hear a storm outside and realize your own family made it colder? Tears filled Jenna's eyes. Even Mark couldn't meet my gaze. "I was scared," he said finally. "I thought you'd fall or get stuck. I thought it'd be easier if..." "If what?" I interrupted. "If I disappeared quietly?" He froze. For the first time, he saw me not as a fragile old woman, but as someone who had survived more winters than he'd ever see, and who wasn't about to melt for his comfort. I didn't shout. I didn't throw him out. Instead, I said something I'd been waiting months to say. "You know, Mark, the thing about snow is, when it falls, it covers everything, even your mistakes. But when the thaw comes, it reveals exactly what's underneath. You can't hide what you buried." Then I stood, walked past him, and went inside. Left him there, quiet, small, and humbled. Later that week, I received a letter from the State Contractor Board. "Your concern regarding unauthorized address use has been reviewed. The matter has been corrected. Thank you for your diligence, Mrs. Davenport." It was official now. His business license reinstated only after he came to me, hat in hand, to fix it. When he did, I made him sign one more thing. A notarized agreement that he would never access or manage any of my accounts again, and that he would repay every cent he'd withdrawn on my behalf. He signed it. Quietly. Without argument. By Christmas, the story had spread, not in a cruel way, but as a kind of parable. People whispered about Ruth Davenport's winter, how a woman who had every reason to break instead taught her son what accountability looked like. And Mark. He was different after that. He stopped bragging. Stopped pretending his success was all his own. Started calling every Sunday, never to ask for favors, but to ask if I was warm. One evening, as the first snow fell again, I got a text. "Hi, Mom. Kids want to come help shovel tomorrow. We'll bring cocoa." I looked out at the falling flakes, smiled, and whispered to Harold's old chair. "Looks like winter finally taught them something. If you've stayed with me till now, thank you. Stories like this aren't just about revenge. They're about remembering that quiet doesn't mean weak, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, the coldest storms don't come from the sky. They come from the people we love. But if you stay still long enough, the thaw always comes.